Hi, everyone. So I'm Julia Schottenstein. I'll just spend a quick minute telling you a little bit more about who we are at DBT, my role here, and how I got here. So we're Fishtown Analytics. We are the company or the makers behind a really popular open source project called DBT. I hope many of you already know that since you're at our meetup, but thank you for joining. But for those of you who are new, welcome, and I'll just give you a little bit of a flavor for what we do. I think the best way to describe what we do is to give you a little bit of information about where we actually sit within the stack. So if you're a data practitioner, you already know this, but your data sits in lots of different raw sources. You need to extract them, load it, put it into your data warehouse. And that's where DBT comes in. So your data warehouse has lots of different tables. It's a mess. You're still figuring out how to make sense of how to transform it, how to put logic and create models. And DBT lets data analysts do that using SQL. So that's where we're really special. We can help data analysts develop models, document it, test it, all using really great software best practices. You can actually deploy your models into systems. And what I think is really cool about what DBT does is we sit at this really important layer, and everybody else on the panel you'll hear from, just to give you a little bit of a preview for where they sit, is it's downstream. And we hold this really important spot where you have to be able to trust your data, you have to be able to structure it. So if we can't get that foundation, a lot of your workflows downstreams will also be off. So we hold this really important role. And it's all open source, so you get that for free. We give that away to all of our users. But we also have DBT Cloud. This is proprietary products that we've built to help really supercharge our data analysts, our analytics engineers. So DBT Cloud is an open core solution that lets you take your transformed models, deploy them, and monitor them in a highly reliable way. So what does that look like? For those of you who are already on DBT Cloud, this will look familiar. This is our cloud IDE. If you haven't checked it out, you should. We think it's a great way for teams who want to move quickly in a highly coordinated way. But you'll get a nice UI like this so that you can do all your workflow and develop your models. You can schedule jobs really easily with one click, deploy, and we bring a lot of CI/CD functionality for you. That's a lot simpler, so you don't need to rely on a data engineer or another team to help you with that workflow. Be happy to talk more about that, hopefully at the session or maybe in the Q&A. But who am I? So I'm Julia Schottenstein. I'm product at DBT. I actually just joined 2.5 weeks ago, but I've been a part of the community for a lot longer. And it's really fun to be on this side of the aisle. And so I'm the product manager for shipments. That's everything related to the scheduler, to CI/CD. We try to make sure that you can deploy your models in cloud with confidence and ease. So if you have any questions about integrating with Git or CI, come talk to me. I'd love to hear what's working really well and where we can do better. And I'm really excited to be here because before being in product at DBT, I was an investor. So I've had a good relationship with many of the other panelists for a long time. And I know it's going to be an exciting conversation. So excited to be here, and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for setting the stage for us. I'd love to spin it over next to Gleb and just keep it going.
Awesome. Thank you, Mila. Just sharing my screen. Cool. So my name is Gleb. I am CEO and co-founder of Datafold. Before Datafold, I, in previous life, was data engineer and build data platforms at Autodesk and Lyft. It's actually really cool to see some other ex-Lyfters here today. So what is Datafold? Datafold is a data observability platform that's coupled with DBT can really help you massively improve your dev productivity. What is a data observability platform, you may ask? And you'll be right, because that's a massively overloaded term. So to us, data observability means really these 4 dimensions. Data observability platform helps you find your data so that you find the data set you need for your work. That helps you understand your data so that you know what you can trust and you can use data correctly. It helps you monitor your data quality and SLAs around your pipelines, and it helps you test your data. And so we really focus on those 4 pillars and integrate closely with dbt, and I'll show you how specifically we can help with your workflows. So with regard to finding data, dbt offers dbt docs, which are really awesome because you can keep them close to your code, and that's a really great practice. dbt docs UI is also great. But what if you also have other tools that are creating environments, creating data sets in your warehouse? Maybe you have raw events, maybe you have something managed by Airflow or other orchestrators. So Datafold provides you a single point of entry to both documentation that comes from dbt and other places with a full text search. The other dimension of data observability is helping you understand your data. And one important aspect of that is just really knowing what is in your data set, right? So Datafold profiles all of the data sets you have in the warehouse on a column level, so you can see how data is distributed. You can also see data quality metrics such as what is the percentage of nulls in your column, uniqueness, and other things that really should be at your fingertips, and so that you can say no to queries such as select, count, star, group by, and such. Another important aspect of understanding your data is lineage. And we all know dbt has great table level lineage, which comes from data, but sometimes you really want to dive a bit deeper to the column level. And especially if your environment is really complex, you may want to answer questions. What's going to happen if I am going to deprecate this column in this raw event? What's going to happen with all the downstream models and BI assets? So Datafold indexes all of your queries in your warehouse. So we built column level lineage, both covering the assets managed by dbt and beyond. And then testing is really a big part of observability as well. So dbt offers assertions with dbt tests, and this is a really awesome resource. So you should always write more tests in your dbt environment. But there are also other types of testing which we believe are complementary and also quite important. For example, metric monitoring. Some things are really hard to codify as assertions. For example, if you're trying to say, I want to know when the number of rows that my model builds is not normal. What is normal if your business is highly seasonal? And such metrics are naturally prone to seasonality. So in Datafold, you can bring your SQL metrics, such as this one, just counting number of rows a day. We plot it as a time series. We fit machine learning model and on top of it, and we'll let you know whenever this metric's outside of the interval. And you can get alerted over Slack, PagerDuty, or your favorite channel. So this is really complementary to assertions. And the third type of testing, we call it data diff. Essentially, it's like git diff, but for data. Why would you want data diff? Well, wouldn't it be cool if on every change to your SQL code, let's say you're changing your dbt model, you would know exactly how your data is going to change, both on a value level, as you see here, but also on a distribution level. So how do your metrics change that are feeding into your ML models or dashboard when you're opening that pull request? And diff can be run interactively, but it's most powerful when you plug it into your CI workflow. For example, every time dbt Cloud builds your staging environment and runs all the assertions, you can also see the diff and see exactly how your data changes, both for the model that you actually modified, but also for all the downstreams. Remember, we have lineage, so we can know exactly what's going to be affected. So that's Datafold. And if you're excited to learn more, feel free to sign up for our community edition. And I'm also available in dbt Slack at Gleb Mezhanskiy Datafold. So thank you. Really excited to be here.
Thanks so much for that, Gleb. Super interesting stuff to see, even just out of the gate. Samir, why don't you take over?
Happy to. So I apologize. Unlike everyone else, I have not brought a set of slides. And so I'm hoping to give a little bit of an acapella, but I mainly want to talk about Metabase. And so Metabase is an open source data visualization application. But the real thing that we do is connect the output of dbt, which is your models, your clean data, the scaffolding, and the information you want to expose to your users, to the folks in the company that don't know SQL. So at some point, there's a bridge that has to happen between the folks on the SQL side of the world and the folks that have normal jobs. And stripped of everything else, we are that bridge. And so whether your end users want to just click around and hunt and peck for whatever it is they're trying to find, whether they are hoping to dig in deeper from a dashboard. And so they've seen something interesting, they want to zoom in, they want to explore, or whether they're actually going to start writing either notebooks or SQL queries. We have a spectrum of options for folks to get into the data that you are creating. And the end result of all of this is that people just get to be lazier. So I think that in many ways, analysts are always slammed with requests. There's always the ad hoc queries. There's always the 11:45 email being like, hey, I have a meeting tomorrow morning. Can you please get me these numbers by 5:45 Eastern? And in general, what we do is we let folks fish for themselves. So at the end of the day, a lot of what we fundamentally provide is that bridge from the data that's being generated by a company in whatever shape, cleanliness, or form it is, to everyone in the company that wants to use it. That's it.
Right on. Boris, why don't you introduce yourself, close us out on this?
Cool. I'm gonna ape Samir and also acapella this, as he said, which is a really nice term. My name is Boris Schwess. I'm the founder and CEO at a company called Census that you can find at getcensus.com. And we are the last mile in what we think of as the modern data stack. So we help take all of this work that you do in DBT, all of the monitoring you can add to that with Datafold, and go one step beyond, let's say, visualizing that information, which Metabase is so useful. We use it internally here to make decisions and look at information. What Census does is it deploys the data out into systems of action. So it helps you close the loop all the way out to where people do their work. So you can take models that you've built in DBT and get that data directly into a CRM like Salesforce, or an email marketing tool like HubSpot or Customer.io. And that way you can use those systems with the latest up-to-date data that has been cleaned and is able to now be put to action, right? So you can now send emails that are not stupid or not duplicated, that have actual correct information in them, that you can have as a data team the impact on the sales team by deciding which leads should be surfaced to a salesperson this week, this month, and use all of the interesting kind of data science and ML on the data team to power that and actually just dramatically increase the leverage of the data team. People just use it for all sorts of things. And it's really fun to see because I get to work with DBT users who realize that with your superpower, like you can actually do a lot more because you can just take all your work and take over all sorts of downstream systems in the business. And that's Census.
Right on. I really like how you're setting the stage already for the question that I'd love to pose to you, actually, Boris, right out of the gate. Is I think the term that summarizes it well is unbundling of the data stack. We're seeing all these different, the former paradigm of end-to-end, one-and-all solutions. They were getting ripped apart into all these layers, whether it's the transformation layer, the visualization layer, and so on. I just want to, I'm sure you're a little biased here. What do you think it's a good thing? Do you think what's prompting this shift? How are we getting here in the first place? And do you think it's going to go too far?
Oh, good question. Okay, that's a really good question. Let me see if I can. So you're right. I think we are definitely in a unbundling, somewhat chaotic period in, let's call it, data infrastructure. But at the same time, the whole pie is growing, which is awesome. And what I mean by that is forget the business, forget like Julia's old job. The data teams are able to do more and take on more responsibility within the company. So because of that, I think the need to have great tools at every layer of that stack actually goes up. And I think the best way to get great tools is to actually unbundle and have very focused products. So at a high level, my take is it's a good thing. I think we could get to too much of a good thing, but I don't think we're there yet. And it's especially good because I think the catalyst for it is that data teams are trying to take on more responsibility in the company and grow what companies can do. And really, I get to watch companies go from just using data on the side. Like I'm sure, Samir, you experienced this a lot at Metabase where there's dashboards, but people don't look at them. And you're like, how do we make that a thing of the past? And this is, to me, it's like, how do you make companies more data driven? And we're really just scratching the surface from what I can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny to me. I see people in the Slack a lot actually who come in from the older paradigm and they're like, why would you want a million different products? You could have the best of every single layer if you want to go after it. Gleb, I'd love to get your thoughts in on this. What do you think about this trend that we're seeing unbundling? And do you think that the prognosis is optimistic?
Sure. I think I'd like to offer a metaphor here. So in software engineering, we've seen this move from, let's say, monolithic architectures to microservices, right? And why microservices are really popular with fast-growing companies, especially fast-growing and large-scale teams, is because they allow multiple teams develop architectures independently and collaborate using APIs, and that enables everyone to work on their specialized thing while the entire system evolves sort of organically and also sustainably. And I think that's what we're seeing happening in the data space as well. Every tool becomes increasingly more specialized, and so that what allows data teams to pick the best solution to their problem, as opposed to trying to pick one that tries to overlap multiple solutions and probably not great at everything. And the particularly great trend that comes along with this unbundling is that I think there is increasing amount of integration between tools, right? So everyone opens their API to share metadata, to share the actual data, and even conforming on some standards. And I think dbt is definitely one of the strongest players here.
We sure think we're biased over here, but I think that there is that general feeling that as we bring over all these lessons from software engineering, we're also picking up their culture shifts as well. And that's really exciting. I just want to throw out, by the way, that I'm going to be posing these questions. And although I don't want this to devolve into a presidential debate where we're all trying to grab our time, if you have a really interesting thought that you want to jump in on, feel free to interrupt me and make sure that you get that in, because we're here to listen to you guys. I actually want to roll it back a little bit. I got so excited with already talking data. Let's get a big picture view to set up the rest of the discussion. Julia, it feels like data is so hot right now. It's moving, it's accelerating. It doesn't seem like it's slowing down. What do you think has sparked all the investment? How we're seeing all these new tools come onto the market and new ways of doing things. It's been a crazy 5 years. What's your take on the situation?
Yeah, has been a really crazy 5 years. I actually think it started maybe a little bit further than that, over 10 years ago when cloud really changed everything. And that was the biggest shift in software period, but also the biggest shift in data. In 2010, that was when BigQuery was released. 2012, Snowflake was founded. A year later, Databricks. And what that really changed in the industry is you no longer had to fight these expensive appliances and figuring out what you needed to store because it was so expensive. You could just abstract away that complexity and pay for a data warehouse as a service. Fundamentally, you could just store everything and figure out later what was important to the business. And that shifted everything because now you just had this wealth of data that you could use to your company's advantage to make really good decisions. And so I think you look at where Databricks is today and where Snowflake is today. Snowflake's a $60 billion company, public. Databricks is nearly 30 billion private. The pie just grew really quickly, and that obviously attracts a lot more capital and entrants. And so there was a lot of capital put into the data stack in particular. But what I find really interesting is if you ask companies, have we solved all your problems? Are you happy with your stack? Is everything humming as you would expect? I constantly hear, no, we still have all these challenges. We could do so much more. We really have to think about data as a product. And that, to me, that pain is really opportunity, and why there's so much so much money going into this space in particular is because we're not done yet. And I'd imagine we're still on the early phases, and there'll be other Databricks and Snowflakes built in the next 10 years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. Data as a product, and in particular, where are we in the maturity of that process? To me, it feels like we're just getting going, because think about how many folks are outside of maybe our little bubble where we're seeing a lot of dynamism. They're completely out of the loop, it seems like, on a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of education that frankly needs to take place for us to broadly distribute these ideas. Do you think that the capital that you're seeing being pushed around? Is it going towards a particular, how do I put this, maybe a breed of startup? Do you think that the maneuverings that we're seeing represent a larger industry movement yet? Or is it more just that we're seeing these emergent trends within pockets of the field?
Yeah, I think a lot of the investment is going into this unbundling of, can we build the very best and build a platform on it? And it's really the shift in that more people can now use SQL to do powerful things. There are 7 million SQL users out there that can, instead of just querying data, can actually build systems that are enduring in their companies. And then hopefully downstream, the business users can self-serve. So a lot of the capital I see going into the space are really in this shift of not having people be just data consumers, but building internal systems that other business units can self-serve on or take action on. And so it's really a shift in not just what's going on, but how do you take action?
Absolutely. Self-service has been such a byword lately. I feel like there's been such a desire to see analysts able to offload more, I almost want to say like responsibility of knowing the data and parsing it. This movement towards a larger data literacy, which frankly requires a kind of rethink to the culture around a lot of these systems. That's what you're saying. Where the capital is going is these new organizations that are embracing this newer kind of emergent trend where we're hoping more people can use SQL and that they can use it to solve bigger problems while other people obtain the data for themselves that they're interested in, rather than us always going to analysts to solve the problem. That actually raises a point, Samir. I would love to hear your take on whether you think this trend that we're seeing, this idea of self-service and data and self-empowerment, do you think that it's just a promise, a fad, a wandering fancy, a fool's errand, or do you think that we can actually get there? And if so, if you think we can get there, what do you think we're missing so far? What steps do we need to take?
So a lot of pieces of that, but maybe I'll kick it off by drawing another analogy to software, where once upon a time, if you wanted to put your name up on the web, you had to learn I actually even forget like whatever CGI protocols there were. You had to write a program, you had to learn HTML, you had to figure out how to run a web server, and all that just to say, hi, my name is Samir and I'm on the internet. And these days, if you want to start a blog, you might install WordPress or even just go to Medium or Facebook or Twitter. And so there's been this profound decrease in the amount of sophistication you need to get your word out and to get a place on the internet for yourself. And I think that there has been a similar multi-decade trend towards self-service. I think if you go back to the 70s, if you wanted to pull something out of a database, you had to look up whatever the API was. You had to write either C or I guess APL or whatever other programming languages were around. You had to go through all this trouble. And then SQL came along in the 80s, and its promise was, I think there was literally ads that were saying like business intelligence for humans, with the idea that it was human readable, human writable. And then you go through to Tableau and eventually to us. And so there's been this multi-generational trend towards how do we get more people who want to actually use data for whatever it is they're using for, where they can apply their intuitions, where they can actually do things with it, as opposed to having it be the thing that experts in data play around with. And so I think that's very much a trend. I think we've been riding that trend for decades. I don't think it's going to stop. I think we are hopefully one of the marquee points in that journey. I'm sure there'll be others after us, but I think the main idea I would plant is that, you know, much the same way as the best writers are not necessarily best able to put up a CGI script and then run a web server and write HTML. Similarly, I think the best people to intuit what's happening in data, to rummage around there, to find patterns, to map their own domain knowledge to that data are probably not able to write Python. And so getting tools in front of them that let them apply their skills, their knowledge, and their domain expertise is pretty imperative. And I think it changes how companies operate. So if you have companies where the only people that can ask an ad hoc question are either data analyst, data science engineer, then only questions that funnel through them get asked or answered. And so as far as should we, I think clearly we should, I think we are. As far as what's missing, I think the good news is everything's being filled in as we go. So there's a closed loop. We've been doing this over and over again. And the world today is much better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I think the next stage really revolves around this idea of data as a product, as Julia mentioned, where there's the need to treat the way that data is shaped, how it's positioned, what it's called, what the column names are, what the various values are, and treat that as a user-facing product, as opposed to a serialization format for developers. And so I think if you talk to most DBAs or data warehousing teams today, they read all the various CODS laws, they have the big data warehousing book on their shelf, and they know how to store data very efficiently. But that there's this jump from, okay, this is a table that is very efficient, that is very expressive, that is consistent, to, okay, these are a set of tables that the average person with a cognitive model of their business can use and map directly to it. So at some point, if you're throwing around fact tables and dimension tables, you're not really creating a self-serviceable data product. I think the biggest transition is going to happen over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, is this notion that the data itself is the internal product, or external product as it happens to be. And that however it's shaped, however it's structured, should be keyed off of the cognitive model of the users and not what is most efficient to store.
Yeah.
Strong endorse.
Please, by all means.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to strongly endorse it. I think that's a really good way of framing what's happening. And I actually think that's both the input and the kind of pressure on why DBT makes sense and why people want to get more literate in data, is because the impact of data when you treat it as a product is way larger. And if you did it purely on a storage oriented thinking or one-off report thinking, you're never going to hit the kind of leverage and scale that you could. And so I think there's just pressure coming from all sides that people will get better at this. Yeah, I just wanted to strong endorse.
It's interesting because I ultimately agree. I strongly think that we're on a ride towards an inevitable destination, and I personally like the outcome. Granted, I never had to play data by the old rules, but whenever I learn about them, it always sounds a little problematic, to say the least. That said, I still talk to a lot of people who are, I don't want to say necessarily stuck, but they really believe that the systems and the procedures that they've honed their talents in are necessary, especially when we're talking to enterprise people. They find that, no, there's reasons why it has to be done this way. And for example, where people are very worried about making sure that they give tooling access to some of their team members on the analyst team and whatnot. And I mean, what would you say to those people who are really reluctant to embrace a broader data literacy program throughout their organizational culture?
Is that to me or to Boris?
I don't know.
Oh, I'd love to hear Boris, and then Samir, please jump in after that.
I think I can ping pong Samir, no problem, I'm sure. I think that goes hand in hand with the concept of product. So if we stick to that, and I think it's a good mental model for what's happening. If you think of data as a product in many ways, and ask a lot of engineers out in the world that have been building products for decades, users are the goal, but they're also the enemy. They are the people who will misuse it, you have to instruct them in how to do things, and then they'll break it, and then you have to deal with that. So it's a natural reaction, I think, to resist the expansion of your addressable user base. But it's a useless kind of thing to resist. Ultimately, all pressure will lead to, hey, more people should be empowered, can be empowered, therefore will be empowered on top of this. And if you resist that, people will work around you. And so ultimately people will embrace it, but it makes sense. And it's that you are afraid of that, which is why you have to invest in, okay, I'll give you that surface and I will illustrate to you why it's the right surface, or I will version that so that we can at least change the surface as we go, because I've been burned by having to maintain the version that you think is correct, but is actually wrong. And that's the stuff that we all have to get better at. And that person who resists, perhaps if you front them with a product manager over time, and we'll start having data product managers, that will solve a lot of the kind of human to human issues there, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just, these are growing pains as you turn data into a product.
I will draw yet another analogy from software engineering, because that seems to be the track I'm on today. So I apologize. I'm not usually this quite maniacal. But I think there's still big organizations doing waterfall development. And if you try to sell tools that are based on any kind of faster cadence, any iterative process, and you go to them, they say, we have reasons for doing it this way. We've done this forever. We work in hardware, we work in auto, whatever. There are always reasons. But I think at the end of the day, there are competitive forces that force behavior. And so there's a show not tell element here, which is companies that do productize data, that do have more efficient, faster, leaner processes internally, that do empower everyone in their company with information they need to just to be better at their job, will as an organization do better. And I think that there's this fundamental sea change that happens when like new ways of running companies emerge. And in much the same way as no one's really talking about how to get the Hilton group to be on board with more nimble software development. And it's just they can do whatever they want. No one really cares. And if you're trying to sell dev tools to them, you might have that fight. But fundamentally, the world's moved on. And I think at some point, the world will have moved on from this idea that dashboards are this pristine culmination of months of work. And instead, there's this idea that everything's fluid. There is real-time adaptation to how data shifts and changes and moves through a company. And that the cadence at which you're able to adjust, adapt, and iteratively improve will leave everything else in the dust. And so if you're still on it takes 3 months to get a perfect 100% correct dashboard in front of anyone for any use case, then the company that has spun up 50 or 100 or 1,000 and killed off 800 in that interim will eventually outcompete you.
I love the boldness of that, because I certainly don't have the context to think that way. So I love the freedom that you're pushing with that, of just, hey, if they're getting left behind, they're getting left behind. Let's keep looking for the modern solutions that we can. Pardon me. I actually want to rope you into this, Gleb. We're talking about organizations that it might be a little more difficult to convince of the importance of these trends. But let's say we've got someone who's more so on board, they're really sympathetic to, this is a common persona that we run into. They're seeing the modern analytics world evolve, they're seeing the practices, and they're seeing their friends that are other enterprise teams getting a little bit more involved. The thing is that I've heard from plenty of people hanging out in Slack, yeah, but our needs as enterprise folks are fundamentally different. We're not just a scrappy data team. So given that they have a lot of vested interest, their data has a ton of gravity behind it. What do you think you advise that person to do if they're really worried about the process, that it's going to be hard, it's not going to be cheap, to tell you that much? How do you help that person along in discovering how to adapt some of these modern practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. Having built data platforms at really large companies, I should say one of the biggest problems is that there are so many different incentive vectors, I'd say, that exist that may not necessarily be aligned with how modern data stack thinks of itself. And they can be politics, budgets, and a lot of friction just because it's a large organization. But let's say the incentives can be aligned correctly, then I think that the right mental model to think about modern data stack from the perspective of, frankly, any organization, but large organization even more so, is I think data is really an enablement for the company, right? Because it ultimately drives decisions made by humans and machines. And to that extent, probably we should think about productivity a lot, especially if you think about workflow of someone like data engineer or analytics engineer. The investment in productivity there really compounds, right? Because they enable data scientists and data analysts, and they enable in turn the business, they enable business stakeholders. And so if you make data engineers more productive, the effect on the organization really compounds. And so modern data stack, I think one of the distinctive features is that it offers greatly better user experience for each respective area and better productivity for the users. And I think that part is largely neglected in many companies, because the mentality, especially at mature organizations, is still very much cost-oriented. For example, are we going to run open source solution for something, let's say for warehouse, or we're going to buy cloud one? But a lot of times what they neglect is the opportunity cost. What can we put the time that of people who will be running that, instead of running that, they can be working on user-facing features. And the same for certain problems that we can solve with point solutions like Census, for example. Sure, you can have 20 people working on data pipelines and data integrations and put stuff into Salesforce, but you can also buy Census and then have them work on actual user-facing features. And I think that opportunity cost is really not really on top of mind for people and not a common way of thinking. And that's probably what prevents the majority of organizations really buying into the modern data stack mentality.
Yeah, and I'll also just add to that, I think that's exactly right. And if people are on these kind of older systems, you're on Teradata or you're still using Informatica, it can become increasingly harder to make the shift. You almost have to make a very big investment and rip the Band-Aid off all at once in order to get into the modern world, because you end up just digging yourself in this hole that's increasingly harder to come out of. The modern data stack that we talked about, it's like very componentized. There's a lot of integration. Everyone kind of benefits when you're in this world together because there's sharing of knowledge across different layers of the stack. And the modern data stack is moving so quickly, they don't have time to build a lot of the integrations into the old world. So if you don't make an investment in just ripping the Band-Aid off and moving into a more modern ecosystem, you continually lose out, and it's just not going to get any easier. And then I'll also make the plug here for open source, which I think is a really exciting kind of way that big companies can get comfortable with. We think a lot about dbt's open source as being the standard for how you model. And that's always going to be free for our users. We want everyone to be on dbt. And if you're a big company, you're not really sure if you want to make the investment yet, or you don't want to get locked in, open source really solves that problem. And then our business is building proprietary, software on top of that so that we can make those workflows even better and supercharge them for you. And that's why I think open source can be a really big advantage too if you're a big company thinking about shifting to more modern architectures.
I do want to plus one something Gleb said there, and I think it's a theme here around there are timeless things about that you can learn about how people ship products, and data has genuinely not historically been a product, to Samir's point, and trade-offs is a huge part of that. It's taken decades for software companies to get good at that, and before that, bridge builders too. But it's something to invest in, I think, as individuals that are pushing things forward here. It's one thing to geek out about versioning and monitoring and all the things that we all work on and that we love about our tools and the dbt as the kind of the foundation. But I think these are very valuable skills to develop as people in your organizations. I found that the default reaction, independent of tools, really honestly, independent of stack, is, hey, ask for a thing. Okay, let me go edit that. It's like, but are you thinking about how that should affect your time? And are you planning that at the week level, month level, quarter level, or day level? If it doesn't have to be waterfall, it's more, are you thinking about your deliverable in this scaled out way? Whereas in most people that I've worked with, like they kind of think about it in a very reactive way. And Gleb, you're saying that can add up to really bad allocation of resources actually over time.
Spirit, you've been hanging out there. Get in on this.
Yeah. So I'll point out that the great thing about enterprise IT is that there is this entire counter revolution of shadow IT, where people show up, they will just slap Metabase or DBT or what have you on a server somewhere, or they'll be running it. And then, I don't know, 6 months later, IT shows up, they're like, what's going on? And so one of the great things about the great unbundling of BI and data science is that the entry vectors into large organizations become much more palatable. And while, of course, you will be a better company if you rip and replace all your stodgy stuff and replace it with a modern data stack, in practice, individual groups, individual engineers, individual analysts can make a big impact long-term by adopting new methods and technologies. And within a company, people start to notice. If your team constantly is prepared at meetings, they know what's going on, and they're the people that are spouting off numbers, people start to, oh, interesting, what are they doing? And so the same dynamics that occur across companies also happen within companies. And with enterprises, like inevitably those fiefdoms and the politics and all that can start to work to your advantage as there just starts to be a difference in, oh, these people have their dashboards in on time. And why is marketing ops always on top of things, or why is, so I think that there's within enterprises both the opportunity of the huge cumbersome world, while also like the rats are taking over the dinosaurs inside of most companies. And for a while, you're just like the rat scurrying around, stealing some grain here or there as like the Teradata and Informatica and MicroStrategies dinosaurs lumber around. But I think it's pretty clear like which direction evolution is moving in.
I'm so glad that we have this being recorded, because I feel like I need to take what you just said and send it to one of my friends in the data industry here who works for a large company I will not name, who's been like, I'm trying to push DBT and all these things, but I don't know if we can actually change. And your analysis of it being a fiefdom distributed kind of revolt is so compelling, because that's the whole idea, right? We're not just preaching this as a fun thing to do. It's like we really see the value here in going for these practices. And I think that's part of a problem I've observed with a few people, is there's a very easy tendency to hear about all these exciting things we're doing and see all the money getting thrown around and be like, this is just a fad, right? This is just like a thing that we're trying right now to see if it's useful or not. And unfortunately, as I believe you pointed out earlier, that's what happened. That's when you get left behind, is when you're not willing to spend some time to keep up with these trends going on. I would love to hear also, just on your perspective, do you think that ultimately we'll get to a stasis where we're existing in our own world? We are to some extent, but there's still communication between the two. Do you foresee a situation where and I say this because you're coming from software engineering, where you might have some legacy system from the 60s written in COBOL or whatever forth hanging out next to on the same server, some very modern application. Do you see data wandering into that trap at all, or do you think it's more dynamic overall? Pardon me. I was following up with you, Samir.
Oh, I think there's always really valuable data somewhere that's really annoying to work with. And forgive me if this is a bit of a tangent from where you feel free to nudge me back onto track, but I think that inevitably there's some ETL job somewhere in an organization that's powering the FP&A dashboard. And it's critically important and it must be correct. And anything that breaks it is de facto not allowed. And I think as companies get bigger, the amount of scar tissue that you cannot break that for any reason starts to accumulate. Healthy companies will abrade that away. And there is a process by which you look at this, and there's someone who has global visibility into the data infrastructure and just says, okay, we really shouldn't be held hostage by a 40-year-old COBOL export that then gets piped through Informatica, that then goes into a dashboard that's built by a vendor doesn't exist anymore. Now, inevitably, scar tissue accumulates. Any company, like we have scar tissue, I'm sure everyone in the room, quote unquote, has scar tissue in their organization. But it's the process of realizing that you're paying a carrying cost for all these legacy systems. And sometimes the answer is they just need to stick around. And it sucks. And a lot of what makes enterprise development, enterprise selling, enterprise anything so complex and so annoying is that there are honestly like good reasons for why they can't turn that thing off. And you as a vendor or developer or project have to work around their scar tissue. And at some point, the accumulation of scar tissue is so much, they just can't deal with them. And you are not the right tool for that. But it's a spectrum. And I think, again, healthy companies do have that process of just braiding away the cruft of the acquisitions and the people that are no longer there and the vendors that have died and the continuity plans that went sideways, and hopefully enter into a brighter future.
Thanks for that optimistic spin there. I don't want to sound too negative. I've just been having so many conversations lately where people are like, why should we do this? And I'm like, isn't it obvious? But I guess that's why we have people who are specialized in selling ideas. I actually want to interrupt the lovely flow we've got going on here. We've got someone over in the peanut gallery that wants to ask a question. Anna, would you introduce yourself a little bit real quick and ask your question for the panel?
Sure. Hi, I am one of the newest members of the community team together with Mila and Jillian. And I think one of you has already jumped into the Slack conversation with me, but I've had an ongoing conversation specifically about self-serve in prior lives, self-serve data. And I've always heard we can't really do self-serve data because people still need to know the right questions to ask. And so we're still going to have to guide them in terms of framing. And what if they get the interpretation wrong and base an entire decision on something that is just correlation and not causation? So what would you say to folks like that?
I assume since I'm like carrying the flag of self-service that's towards me, I think the answer is it's already happening and sucks to be you. So you can either get it under control, and I'm more talking to like the CIO level. I think as an individual analyst, it's you have to work within your organization. There's playing on a team, but I think the fundamental reality is people are self-serving their questions anyway. It's either not being answered and it's being dropped on the floor, or they're like cobbling together answers from the 3 different errors of spreadsheets they have, or they're digging into various tools that, if they're not using Census, are probably have stale data. And so the functional reality is that people have jobs and they're going about their days and they're like doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, and they're using the information they have on hand. And it's your choice whether you're going to get information to their hands that is controllable, controlled, clean, whatever, or you're just going to let them keep rummaging around and asking their friend over in finance and just like doing what they have to do to get their jobs done. So I think like it's happening regardless. It's your choice whether you want to help them find better answers and better questions and educate them in how to use data. The cat's been out of the bag for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's really like a 2-pronged approach. Like the data teams are never going to go away. They have a really big role to play. And it's part of the challenge of setting up the data as products so that it has the right confines and boundaries, so that you can't find yourself in a world where you think you understand how the data is relates to it, or you're drawing a logical conclusion and you're completely off base. So I think what needs to be done better in organizations too is like defining a metric or making it really clear what a data value means, so that you can have that literacy so people can then go and self-serve. If you start skewing too much in one or the other direction, of course you get people who have self-served answers that are completely wrong, or you just don't have the same speed that you would want when you're relying on the data team to answer everything. So it's a healthy balance you have to play, but I do think the data team's responsibility is defining that boundary of what should be self-serve and what needs to be modeled.
Boris, Gleb, either one of you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what Samir and Julia have said. I think that there is no way but to use tools for empowering people. And I think that the right tools provide the only way to help people be more productive and use the data correctly. For example, just to illustrate with our panelists. So dbt is great because it codifies everything that could have been just floating around as random SQL queries. And it gives a lot of structure into how people think about building data, making it useful, building metrics. The same thing about products like Metabase, right? You can curate experiences for your end users and gradually, I wouldn't want to say force, but nudge them towards the right direction. But it's like with any tool, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't use machine learning because people can invent artificial general intelligence and kill humanity.
If I can also chime in, I think what's most interesting as you start playing this out in most organizations is that the more people that have access to a given data set, the more likely you are to realize there's something incorrect about it that the analysts or data engineers did not catch. And that often there's this game of telephone between the people within a given domain that explain what's happening in that domain to an analyst, data science, or data engineer, and then it's laundered back to them. And that process is both lossy and error prone. And that the ability for people to rummage around and to find all the weird nooks and crannies and just understand and to find the things that look off is a part of the healthy process of then iterating on that definition. And a world where there's some business analysts that talk to users, that talk to data engineers, that create models, and that's magically correct isn't really how the world actually works. Instead, it's just wrong, but it's ossified and wrong. And so while firmly crooked is maybe better than chaos, I suspect that chaos that leads to accuracy is a better world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the more you can reduce the dimensionality, specifically at the higher level of you're not building 5,000 reports, you're building one data product and a core set of metrics, to everyone's point. You can it's a lot easier then to have people get it right as consumers of it. And I think I had someone tell me this a couple of years ago. It was like a really sad, but probably realistic way of thinking about it is in many ways, they felt their job was to get everyone equally unhappy about the metric so that you could compromise on the meaning of it as opposed to having 4 versions of it. And I think that's the art of what we have to do as people on the data side. You will not succeed if you have to have 40 versions of the same thing. And to your point, Anna, it's like you have to explain that. This means that you have to reduce that to have any level of success in terms of leveraging your capability.
Absolutely. Got another question here that I want to bring in from our attendees. That said, feel free to just jump in if you feel like you have something really compelling to say. And if we have to, we'll make a little queue and we'll get everyone's thoughts. And Annie, would you like to jump in here, unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hey guys, I'm Annie. I work at a firm called Anthos Capital. I have to jump in literally 30 seconds for a call, but I'll watch the recording because I'm very curious about the answer. We talked a lot about transitioning your stack to modern, and it's a lot focused on later stage, but how early is too early in adding these tools? And is there such thing as like an order of operation to do things first? You have 10 seconds.
Let's say
The warehouse comes first, but everything else, I think you can be more piecemeal.
+1 on the warehouse. I'd say
Strong disagree.
you disagree. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get it going. Let's get the debate going. It'll be on record. Let's go.
Yeah. All right. So with Metabase,
Finally.
we create any data warehouse. And I think it's critically important to slap a viz layer of your choice on top of data as soon as you have it. And that cleanliness, storage, efficiency, and all that comes as second and third acts. But that getting that data in front of the people in your company is by far the most important first step, and everything else flows from their feedback. So I think, again, many companies use Metabase, use us way before there's a data warehouse. And I think they see transformative effects. They see people having access to data. They see the ability to share and remix and move dashboards around. And none of that requires either clean data or a Snowflake account. And that the Snowflake account comes in month 18, as opposed to the first moment. So that's my spiel. I'll stop.
Can I get a rebuttal?
It's a strong argument, I will say, like, because I think with Samir, the best aspect of that angle that I will concede to you is users will give you more rope to invest in data infrastructure once they see the value, which is not, the warehouse is not the value. The reason I think I answered warehouse is we were talking about the data stack, and I think of the data stack as very much built around the warehouse and separated workloads and infinite storage and infinite compute. And like a single read replica Postgres or a single transactional DB doesn't get you that. And so you can't really buy into the rest, I think, of the modern data ecosystem if you haven't made that leap. I see the angle that you're going for sure.
I'm going to watch your answer on the recording. I'm so sorry that I'm missing it, but thanks everyone.
Thanks for asking. Take care.
All right. See you later.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a dimension of what is really hard to replace. And for example, to Boris's point, warehouse is really hard to replace if you decide on the wrong one. And the longer you go with your choice, the harder it is to replace, because you have all these queries, all these ETL jobs that you need to convert, port the data. I spent 2.5 years of my life migrating Lyft out of Redshift, and that was no joke. And so the good thing about modern data stack is that the majority of products there are typically quite cheap to start and get going with, even for a startup. And they scale really nicely. For example, warehouses scale really nicely with compute and storage. To Boris's point about the infinite scalability, I think products like Metabase and dbt also scale nicely with more people that you add there. And I think that the rule of thumb that I'd use is, if you see a problem that you can solve with an existing tool, it's most likely going to be cheaper to solve with a tool rather than trying to build something in-house in, I would say, 90% of cases, because people's time is its most expensive asset. And as long as you can solve problems with money, modern data stack allows for solving the vast majority of problems today.
I wish you could more easily convince people of that, because there's such a resistance I find from certain quarters that, oh no, we want to keep it in-house. We want total control over the process. Do you have the time to devote to really thinking critically to the level that the experts of that product are doing so? It's still such an open thing. It's going to be fun to see how it hashes out over the next few years for sure. I want
You have to emphasize,
yeah.
emphasize them too, right? Think
Mhm.
about, as an industry, we rushed ahead for 10 years on SaaS. And now, partially due to regulation and partially due to breaches, like people are starting to rethink like how they manage critical infrastructure. And it's probably a reasonable thing to think about that. That doesn't mean they're making the right decision by default by going, I want to keep it all in-house. But I think there are ways you can see how you can empathize with that perspective.
Of course. Absolutely. No, and I'm so glad that you bring that up. I want to, we're going to start winding things down, but I always like to end little panels with a lightning round question. So I'd love to go down the line. We'll do Julia and then Samir and then Gleb and Boris to round it out. Just what do you think for people listening? What is the #1 priority that people should be thinking about with their teams, new tools, broader trends in the data industry? Just give us one to close out. We'll start with you, Julia.
I'll use empowerment and scale.
Right on. Gleb?
I've related, I'd say invest in productivity, because right now there's such a big gap between the data teams that are performing and that are performing really well. And so constantly try to improve that.
Samir?
1,000 flowers bloom. Get data in front of everyone and help them do their job better.
And Boris, you know the drill.
I'd say like invest in your team and where it sits. Get out from under your CFO.
Right on. It's always such a pleasure to be able to be in these conversations, asking the questions, because I'm just like, I get to front row seats, just learn a bunch of stuff. So we just want to thank all you folks taking time to come in and share some knowledge,